right. Good afternoon. We're in for a real treat. As you know, my name is Mark Ford. I coordinate the percussion program here, and we're honored and privileged to have Dame Evelyn Glennie with us, not only for this question and answer session today, but also to perform with the Wind Symphony tomorrow night, and then again with the Wind Symphony at the Texas Music Educators Association Conference in San Antonio. So what a thrill to be able to have her here working with our students, performing, and also sharing some insight with you today. Now, I could talk a long time, but I'm not going to do that because Evelyn's credits are very lengthy. She is the most acclaimed percussion soloist of our time, performing with symphonies and chamber groups around the world. She has been challenged in life with her deafness and overcome in a way that has inspired thousands upon thousands of people, not just musicians, but people from all walks of life understand the types of challenges that she's had and the successes that have touched our lives, and it's really been beautiful to be able to watch this transpire. Evelyn and I met each other, a long time ago, many years ago, and it's just been a joy and inspiration for me to watch her career blossom. So if you guys would please welcome me in giving a nice, warm North Texas welcome to Dame Evelyn Glennie. Now, when we talked about this, when Evelyn and I were communicating about this session, I realized that this would be a prime opportunity for us to continue our 10 questions plus. Those of you that were with us during the pandemic or maybe watching from home during the pandemic, we were able to have conversations through Zoom with percussion icons like Gary Burton, Steve Gadd, Keiko Abe, and Andy Norell, and many others. The list goes on and on. But this is the first time we've had the artist in front of us to be able to talk with and have interaction with. So we're so blessed. So what's going to happen now is we're going to invite Evelyn to speak for a little while, a little bit about what she's doing here and about what's going on in her career right now. And then I'll introduce each of the students to come up and ask the questions.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much, Mark. That's really a lovely introduction. And for me, it's just such a pleasure to be here. It's actually 22 years since I was last here. And so the experience of performing with such an extraordinary wind ensemble was something that definitely I have remembered. And so to have this opportunity to return again is just been absolutely terrific for me. So thank you very much for allowing this to happen. And I'd just also like to say, what an incredible warm feeling I felt since the day I arrived. Yes, it was a tad on the icy side, but it quickly melted. And so I just want to say thank you to Mark and all the wonderful people who have just looked after me so well. But ultimately, when we give a concert, it's all about teamwork. So, and that's what I really enjoy. I enjoy the experience of performing live because you never quite know what's going to happen. And I think that we were all slightly jolted when the pandemic happened because we didn't know what we would actually be doing with our particular performance skills. And it's not quite the same, setting a microphone up in your living room or your kitchen or something like that and having the head space to actually perform. Having said that, some people have done it extremely well. But for me, I think it was a chance to reconnect with an awful lot of the instruments that I have happened to accumulate over the many years. And there's quite a big difference when you're preparing something whereby you're due to perform it on the 29th November 2024 or something, to actually just having the freedom to pick something up and not quite knowing where it's going to take you. And you don't have that sort of time scale where you have to produce something for a particular date or time. And for me, I think it was a really creative process to reconnect with a lot of instruments, to start from, you know, the ground base, as it were, with a lot of the equipment, get into things that I just simply haven't had the time to do, but have been curious about, things like Indian tabla, or reconnecting with the Irish bodhrán, or discovering the many different ways of playing the spoons throughout the world, and the musical bones, and that type of thing. And really, it was all about keeping the muscle groups really supple, keeping that mind also supple and curious, and just really, you know, accepting the fact that, well, who knows where this may take you. So for me, it was a really productive little time, I have to say, but I count myself very lucky in that I was healthy and I had that opportunity to have the equipment at home. So, but it just, I think, makes you realize how fragile, in a way, this profession is. In fact, any profession is, when you think about it. But I think it really jolted us to think that, well, actually, do we have a plan B, a plan C, a plan D, and so on? So really, you know, what we do when we're in the privacy of our own four walls and we're busy practicing and so on, and you then come out of that practice room or practice space, you then have to say to yourself, well, now what? What has that meant? You know, so you zoom out of your situation, because you'll have zoomed in on so many things within that practice room. But when you zoom out, you have to think, what are you going to do with the time that you have spent? So you might have spent 2 hours, 3 hours, something like that, 4 hours, I don't know, however many hours you spend with your instruments. But then how much do you dedicate towards familiarizing yourself with the business that you want to be in, and really delving into what it means to be a musician, and really thinking about all the many different strands that you may have to encounter as you embark on your career. So I think an establishment like this, where there are just so many opportunities, just know that, you know what, you can tap into the medical side, you can tap into the business side, you can tap into the IT side, you can tap into so many things that this university has to offer. And you never know, take a leaf out of Bill Gates' book and just think, well, walk into a bookstore and pick a book that you think you have absolutely no interest in whatsoever, but sure enough, there might just be something there, a tiny little seed that triggers an idea or a thought. I'll give you a little example. I remember reading a book about Roger Federer, the tennis player, and there's a chapter all about his grip, how he grips his tennis racket. I thought, oh, that was interesting, you know. But that little chapter gave me a little idea as regards to how I might manipulate the mallets, you know. Well, who would have guessed? You know, I just happened to be a fan of Roger Federer and wanted to know a little bit more about his life. But little did I think that there would be that little connection there between his grip in holding the racket and the mallets or the sticks. So, you know, you just never know. So keep your antennae open and see where it takes you. So, there we go.
Okay, our first student had a change in her class, and so we're going to change. Raina's not here yet, right? So Maddie, would you like to come up? And she's going to ask the first question for you. And this is Maddie Wallace. And Maddie's a performance major, junior, senior? Senior, okay.
Hi. I was just wondering, well, this is Raina's question. She said, in your life, has anything ever felt impossible? And if so, how did you move forward?
Super. Thank you very much. So in your life, has anything ever felt impossible? And if so, how did you move forward? Well, you know, I'm sort of one of those kind of people whereby there are lots of things that you think might be impossible. You might look at a piece of music, and many a times I think, oh my Lord, you know, how am I going to negotiate this? But the first rule of thumb is don't panic. You know, really don't panic. And it's just sort of giving your time, giving your body, your mind, the time to just sort of be with that piece of music. And I don't necessarily mean with the instrument. I just mean, you know, sort of pick it up, have a little look. So I had a little moment the other day where yesterday when I had the opportunity to practice, and I put some music up that I need to learn. And I thought to myself, ooh, how this is notated, it's just simply not going to work. So I have to kind of step back and I think to myself, well, is it just that I can't play it, or is it that actually it is playable, but I'm just not seeing where that entry point is, or does it need to be re-notated? So basically I looked at the piece, I tried it and so on, and discovered that, oh, crumbs, I couldn't quite find a way to make this possible, really. So I just popped it back in my case and I slept on it, and then this afternoon I took it out again, and lo and behold, a little idea came, and I just managed to work out how I might potentially, negotiate this piece of music. So, but for me, if I'd made that initial decision where, oh, this is unplayable, I can't deal with that, and oh, I need to go back to the composer and tell him to sort it out or something, then immediately you're not giving yourself a chance, you're not giving the composer a chance, and it's kind of fun to work these things out. I think on a larger scale as regards to the journey of my career, there has never really been a time where I felt something is impossible, because everything is possible. Okay, I'm not going to be a model, I'm not 6'2", so that isn't going to work, but there are other aspects whereby I'm naturally suited to, in the same way as you, is the same as every single person in this room. So there's always something, there's always a story that we have, and it's working out what is that story, and what is that story to you, not me trying to feed my story into you. Do you see what I mean? So I think that, yes, it depends what this is doing. If you decide to make something impossible, it will be impossible. If you decide to think that, oh, you know what, let's just give this a little bit of time. It's like a brand new piece of music, giving a premiere. We don't decide whether we like it or don't like it. It's like a first date. We need to give it time, and that means performances. So it's like driving a car. You're not suddenly passing your test and becoming Michael Schumacher or something like that. You need lots and lots of time to get used to different kinds of terrain and different circumstances with that vehicle. And it's exactly the same with a piece of music. It's exactly the same with any person that we connect with in what we do. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, our next student is Logan Scott, a junior music education major. You can just go that way.
Thank you.
Dame Glennie, it is so good to have you. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Logan.
You're welcome. So as percussionists, we're expected to be versatile on so many different instruments. So I'm wondering, has there ever been a point in your career while studying a certain instrument or studying with a community of people related to a certain instrument that you felt somewhat out of place? And if so, how did you work to overcome this?
Yes, it's a really interesting question, and it's very pertinent, I think, to percussionists. Yes, is the answer. But again, it's just how you think about these sort of things. So you can say to yourself, oh, crumbs, I really do feel out of place here. And you feel out of place in so many situations. It could be with a group of people or in a particular place, a particular environment and so on. So it doesn't really have to pertain to music only. But yes, but it's going back to your particular journey. So for example, if I'm collaborating with people who play gamelan or Indian music or African or Latin music, whatever it might be. Yes, I feel out of place, but the point is why are you there? So what are the circumstances for you to be there? And what is the end result that you're all trying to achieve as a collective? Not you as an individual, but as a collective. That's really important. So, I could feel out of place even if I'm playing a piece for the first time and the composer is right there, and it could be, I might be thinking, well, heavens, am I on the right track here with the interpretation, or am I way off the mark, So you sort of feel, ooh, should I be here? Am I the right person to be here? And all of that. So it's the difference between being out of place and being doubtful. So do you see what I mean? If you begin to feel doubtful, that will kind of erode into your confidence. But if your antennae, and I'll probably tattoo that on your forehead, but if it's completely open and you're really, prepared to receive and to digest and to observe and all of that sort of thing. I mean, I'll never forget the time, I think it was 1989, and I went to Rio de Janeiro, and I had the opportunity to play with a samba school. I'd never picked up a Brazilian instrument in my entire life. And there I was in this samba school, a massive kind of barn place. It was extraordinary, so many people. And they didn't speak English at all. And they would just say, watch, watch, watch. Just sort of pointed, eyes to the instrument, eyes to the body, eyes to the movement, that type of thing. And that's exactly what I did. I felt incredibly out of place, and actually, to begin with, incredibly inadequate. I thought, why is this Scotswoman, in the middle of this extraordinary situation? And then I thought to myself, my God, what an opportunity. This is unbelievable. So you sort of see beyond the instrument in a way, so you're kind of grasping what makes these people do what they do, and project how they project. And it's much more than just the techniques of the instrument. It's something they live, they breathe, they eat, they move, everything to do with their environment. So of course, there's going to be that feeling because I was brought up in a completely different place. I speak a different language. But that doesn't stop me from being a good observer, from being a good listener, by just sort of soaking this experience up. And so everybody is entitled to be in a particular place. It's just how you observe that place and how you digest that. But all the time, when I got home after that, I had a phase where I was very much into Brazilian music. But, it soon I soon realized that, well, hold on a second, how am I going to use this in my journey as a solo percussionist? So I learned a lot of techniques. I learned an awful lot about giving sound and projection and all of that type of thing. And the sort of thing of making the instrument almost like an extension of your body. I just couldn't feel how you could take a pandero away from some of those players. It was just so much an extension of their limbs. So that was a huge learning curve for me. And I knew that I could use all of that feeling, of experiencing that in my own playing. I knew I'd never really be, or indeed want to be, the greatest pandero player, or the tamborim player. But it gave me that curiosity to think, okay, I have enough here to use it in my own way. So it's always about it sounds quite selfish, but listening to yourself. What is your journey? So everything we observe, whether it's from a string player, brass player, percussionist, singer, whatever it might be, just observe, because there's something we can take as sound creators that can make the difference and make you unique. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Logan.
Wonderful. Our next student to ask a question is Emma Kesselhorst, and she's a junior performance major.
So in your TED Talk, you mentioned how you applied and auditioned for the Royal School of Music, and the first time that you did, they rejected you because they considered your deafness to be a problem. And then when you did make it, did you ever feel as though you had to prove yourself or that you were treated differently? And then just kind of what was your overall time at the School of Music and how did it help you become a solo percussionist?
Indeed, yes. So auditioning for the Royal Academy of Music in London and if I felt, slightly different to other people and so on. And yes, that was a really interesting period because I basically, when I was 15 years old, I decided to become, or at least try to become, a professional musician. So the decision was made to study music full-time. So I basically only auditioned for 2 places, not expecting to get in. So the Royal Academy and the Royal College of Music in London. And so I auditioned simply to get the experience because I had absolutely no idea, growing up in the northeast of Scotland, where I was as regards to the level of playing and things like that. So when I auditioned for the academy, they felt that they couldn't accept me. So they felt that basically a professional orchestra would not employ a hearing impaired musician. So I said to them, well, first of all, was the audition of the standard to get in? Yes or no? So they said, well, yes, it was, but a professional orchestra is not going to hire you. And I said, well, I don't want to be in an orchestra, so you're creating something that, doesn't really exist in my mind. But more importantly, you cannot say to someone and dictate to someone, well, I think this, I think that. That's a kind of dangerous situation to be. And you can't start picking and choosing who can and can't get into an institution based on something that is going on with their body. So you can't say to a blind person, oh, I'm sorry, but you can't be an accompanist to opera singers or something. Or if someone has one arm, I'm sorry, but you can't be a flute player. That type of thing. So anyway, they basically, there's one man on the panel who sort of felt very strongly about the fact that, well, hold on a second, we're on dangerous ground here. So if someone is reaching the standard to get in, we really must accept that person. So the rest of the panel disagreed with that. However, he said, let's ask this person back for a second audition, and then we'll make a decision. So, of course, I had returned to Scotland, I had to return to London. The second audition was all about general musicianship, no percussion playing at all, so I didn't see a percussion instrument in sight. It was all at the piano keyboard. It was to do with figure-based sight reading, score reading, transposition, looking at a piece, deciding who might have written it, etc., etc. And all of that, thankfully, was something that was very much nurtured when I was at school. Because my percussion teacher at school, who was a peripatetic percussion teacher and went to different schools throughout the Northeast, he treated us all as sound creators first and foremost, then musicians, and then instrumentalists. So it doesn't matter which instrument you play. It could be a paper and comb or a kazoo or something. We create sound, and our jobs is to create a sound story. So it meant that, for example, I remember one of the early snare drum lessons I had, my teacher gave me a violin partita, and it was something like in G minor or D minor or A minor or something like that. And he asked me to look at the first phrase. And so I looked at the first phrase. Now that alone is a form of sight reading, So you're looking at this in the ebbs and flows and that. And it went something like that sort of thing. And he asked me, what is the key of this piece? So I said, whatever key it was in, G minor or whatever. And he said, what do you feel G minor to be? And I thought, ooh, G minor, well, I feel it to be a kind of cheeky minor key. It's trying to be naughty, but it's not really a threatening minor key. You can almost imagine a fireside there, quite friendly. So, and then he asked me, well, where might you see the climax of that phrase? So you could decide where you wanted that. So he then said, okay, Evelyn, please play that on the snare drum. So what happened? You're playing a violin partita on a snare drum. And what happens is that you're literally forgetting yourself as the snare drum player and not thinking about grip and things like that, but you're thinking about the story. And what happens is that the sense of touch becomes the most important sense of all. You're doing stuff with the sticks that you're never going to find in a tutor book or a method book or really from a teacher, actually. That's coming from you, your body weight, your physical attributes, your relationship with that phrase from the violin partita, your relationship with G minor, and so on and so forth. So that second audition actually was right up my street. So I could really think, musically, what I was being asked to do. And so from that, they basically said you can start in September. And so to answer your question, which I realize I haven't really answered, no, I didn't feel different, or I didn't feel I had to prove myself. That's not the kind of person I am. I compete with myself, for sure. I'm always, weeding stuff out of my own kind of sound garden, as it were. I'm always having to sort of work on stuff. That never stops. We all have to do that. And part of that is a sense of curiosity as well. And part of it is I need to find a way to be able to play that particular passage. So it keeps your feet firmly on the ground. But I think the best thing we can do if you are inclined to sort of start comparing and things like that, which is very easy to do because of the explosion of social media, is really just find the positive things from people. Think, wow, that's interesting. I might try that. Or, oh, there's something that someone does, and that's really, really interesting, rather than literally compare this to that. That's dangerous territory to be in. Just be comfortable with your own journey and how you function, and celebrate that, because we really are all different. I'm surrounded by you in the band, and I'm absolutely in awe. You know what I mean? I'm kind of thinking, wow, that's really interesting, and cool, blimey, that's fascinating. And so, I'm always kind of thinking, oh, that was played really interesting. I wonder, that's maybe giving me an idea or something. So you're forever then a student, really. So just, as I say, I just sort of try and think about my own journey. There's not enough time for me to kind of, think about, and I know that sounds selfish, but think about other people as far as trying to compare. So just pick the positives, really, yeah. And by all means, you can look at the negatives, but not in a detrimental way. So everything, can be a learning experience. Thank you.
It's a fantastic message. That's beautiful. Our next student is Daisy Waters, senior in percussion performance.
Yes. There we go. All twined up.
Oh,
Isn't it?
Okay. Hello, Dame Glennie. It's an honor to be speaking to you, and it's an honor to get to have you here on campus. I remember watching your TED Talk, and there were two ideas in particular that I really loved. The first one was when you talked about looking at a piece of music before getting to know it, and then you looked at a member in the audience, and you were kind of relating what it was like to look at the piece of music before getting to know it and look at a person before getting to know it. And the second idea was talking about different mallet choices, and you were kind of relating it to how different mallets have sound colors the same way different people have different personalities. And it really seems like you're in touch with the idea that making music is really intrinsically tied to being human and to being just in the world with other people. And so I was wondering if there were any other ways that you felt that making music was just a really fundamental part of being a person.
Well, music is all about people when you think about it. Even if we're creating something through technology, it still has to be manipulated by a human being. And, it comes from a human's creativity and imagination. So it starts from there. That's where the seed really, really is. Or we may plant something in our minds. So I think that's why, music is such a sharing kind of experience. It's very giving, but also the relationship that we do have with our audience is absolutely vital. I mean, the difference between making a recording with no audience and you're almost making love to the microphone as opposed to having an audience there, they can really change so many things in what we do and how we think and how we function. So I feel that for me, there's that idea of a live performance is, in a way, bringing all the elements together, the room that we're in, which actually is the instrument in itself, the acoustics. When we're starting an instrument, how many times do we talk about acoustics? You know what I mean? We don't really talk about that sort of thing, how many times do we talk about sound color when we start an instrument? You know, when we talk about dynamics and that sort of thing, loud, what does loud mean? Soft, what does soft mean? What on earth is that, you know? But if we think of a fragile soft, or a scary, sinister soft, or a present soft, or a gentle soft, or a nervous soft, or a hazy soft, a misty soft, a distant soft, you know, all of that conjures up different senses of touch in a way, and our experiences are different. So if I'm thinking of soft, you know, I might be thinking of, you know, that Scottish mist, you know, over a hill or something like that. Or I might be thinking of just this sort of sparse kind of field that's just got wheat weighing, you know, to and fro like this, you know. Or I might sort of think of a lonely kind of stone wall in the distance on the Orkney Islands or something, you know, but that would be my experience of dealing with dynamics. Yours might be totally different, but equally valid. So I think that boils down to the interpretation, so the difference between translation and interpretation. So you and I can look at a piece of music and see, right, allegro, allegro, what does that mean in a wet acoustic? Allegro, what does that mean in a dry acoustic? Allegro, what does that mean in a recording studio? Allegro, what does that mean in an outdoor venue? Do you see what I mean? Okay, now it says P. P, what does P mean? P equals piano, soft. So soft, outdoors, soft, indoors, soft, wet acoustic, soft, dry acoustic, soft, recording studio. Do you see what I mean? Yeah. Which instrument are we playing? And so on. Soft, soft with resonance, soft, dry. What are we talking about? So, yes, and I think that when we are thinking about our audience, you know, every time we play something, even if it's a piece we've played a million times before, it's still a world premiere. We're in a different situation, different group of musicians, a different day, different time, different circumstances, and so on. So Dream Machine tomorrow by Michael Doherty will be a world premiere, even although it's been performed before. Do you see what I mean? Right. So performing with you all, an audience, you know, who has come in there and they're experiencing something for the first time, even if they've seen the band, you know, the symphony, the Wind Symphony many times before, even if now and again they've seen me, but under these circumstances, it's a world premiere. So we're kind of all participating in that interpretation. We really are. So I think that's why music is so interesting, or one of the reasons why it's so interesting, because we keep, I think, peeling another layer in what we do. It's just this constant peeling, or looking around the next corner, or opening the next door, and just seeing. And we might come to a brick wall, or other times we might see this incredible landscape that we hadn't realized that was there. So the longevity of your career, the longevity of your curiosity is all about that. It's just sort of, ooh, I just wonder, turning the next page. You know, so yeah, keeping everything open. You kind of wonder why a lot of percussion instruments are round in shape. Yeah. You know what I mean? It goes on and on and on and on, and you never know what is going to happen next.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Daisy. Thank you.
Right. Let's welcome Sam Cook. Sam is a junior percussion performance major.
You look like a rugby player.
So I kind of have like a two-part question for you. The first part, I wanted to know what your experience was like performing at the Olympics back in 2012. And then the second part, I wanted to know, how were you able to like get this opportunity, and like was there something you had to do, or was there something that like you had done already that like helped you acquire this?
Yes. Well, the London 2012 opening ceremony, oh heavens, it was an incredible experience, I will say. And it was teamwork at its best. literally that. There were thousands of people taking part. And the bit that I had to participate in involved 1,000 drummers. Now, 99.9% of those drummers had never picked up a pair of sticks before. So they were people who just simply wanted to take part. And we were basically depicting the feel of the Industrial Revolution. And so when we were thinking about the type of drums to use, we thought about snare drums. Well, that's too militaristic. We thought about ethnic drums. Well, no, that's not the right context for the Industrial Revolution. And when you think of the Industrial Revolution, again, this is all about storytelling. You're thinking hard, metallic, sweaty, dirty sound. You know what I mean? So just this kind of hard-working type of sound. So that's why we decided on metal buckets and plastic buckets and that sort of thing, so that we would get this feeling of crunch as opposed to bang, like that. So we didn't want the precision. We just wanted this dirty sound, this sweaty kind of sound. So that's why we decided on that. So the feeling was getting all of these volunteers together to create something that was incredibly powerful, was unbelievable. And I have to say, 11 years on, a lot of those drummers have continued. So they've kept their groups going, which is incredible. So it had a huge impact on people. But I think it was also really extraordinary to find all the people behind the scenes working incredibly well together. So you're talking about the huge amount of technical crew. It was unbelievable. So all of them deserve gold medals, I have to say. But it really was teamwork at its best, and nothing really happens in isolation. So that was an unforgettable period, really, an occasion for me. Why did I get that job? Well, I think the lesson here is that don't take anything for granted. So I remember the reason I got that particular job was because I was asked, I don't know, maybe 2-3 years before, to open a school hall, not a million miles from where I live. So I opened this hall, and then they asked if I would just give a little concert. It was a tiny little school hall. So I happened to give a recital, and you never know who is in the audience. And that's what I mean. Grasp every opportunity as though it really is the most extraordinary experience ever, And so size means nothing, Even if you think that, oh, well, this will do, it won't do. Give 200%. You just never know what is going to happen. And that was one occasion. I had finished the recital and so on and so forth. And then I got a little message saying that a gentleman called Rick Smith from Underworld happened to be in the audience on the night of the recital. And his daughter went to that particular school. What he liked about the recital was the energy. So he didn't mention the pieces or anything like that. It was the energy, and he could feel the energy could be then planted into the scenario of the Industrial Revolution. So now it's interesting what people pick up on. And sometimes we get so honed in on technique and things like that. And, it's just what is it about the storytelling of being a musician? And it's more than how you might hold a mallet or a stick or that type of thing. So I thought that was quite interesting. So it was just simply the energy. And so he asked, would I like to take part in this? And I said, okay, thank you very much. And that was that. So it's a simple little lesson, really, but just, any opportunity you have, plow 200% of yourself in that. Don't take it for granted. You just never know who might be in that audience.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Evelyn, behind you in the Wind Symphony, there's about 7 or 8 percussionists, and one of them is Graham Viget. And Graham is going to ask you the next question.
Thank you so much for coming. It's been great to rehearse with you the last few weekends and learn from you about that.
Thank you.
And my question is about improvisation. It's a big part of your artistry. And I'm curious, how do you choose to improvise beyond what's notated in the score? And does every piece allow room for improvisation, or are you limited in some circumstances?
It's a really interesting question. I really believe in improvisation, first of all, as being part of our journeys as musicians. I really do, because for me, I really like to improvise creating soundscapes. That's where I think I'm happiest, actually, is creating those soundscapes. And it just allows me to delve into the instruments in ways that I don't have to think about this or that, you know, about, oh crumbs, I need to be holding something in a certain way. It's just, what are you feeling? Go with that. And then seeing what sort of landscape you want to build. Having said that, so maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I started working with a jazz trio. Now, the jazz trio HLK, they're completely self-contained in themselves. So talking about your earlier question about feeling slightly outside, you know, of your comfort zone, this was one of those occasions. But, you know, again, it goes back to the chemistry between people and why they have chosen for you to be there, you know, and it isn't always the most kind of obvious thing. So I could have said, oh, you know, I've got absolutely zero experience working with jazz, you know, so I'm not really the right person. But actually, it's just taking the time and thinking, well, what can I bring to this? And then what do I need to learn and try to develop moving forward? But to answer your question, I think a lot of the pieces depends on what the composer wants. So, for example, if I'm working on a piece, commissioning a piece of music, let's take Dream Machine, for example. Now, Michael is really open to different ideas in the writing process. So, you know, 99% of that piece is notated. But then there are notated parts which are kind of improvisations. So probably the whole kind of first 2-3 pages of that piece will be nothing like the printed notation when we actually come to perform it, you know. Now, if Michael said, Evelyn, you know, I really need you to kind of, you know, stick a little bit more to the music there, I'd absolutely respect that for sure and make that work. I'll never forget a time when I was playing a piece by the late Jonathan Harvey, a wonderful British composer who spent a lot of time over here in the States. And he had composed a percussion concerto, and I was taking a few liberties with it, but the score was so incredibly detailed, actually. But even with that, I was still taking a few liberties. And in that first rehearsal, he said, Evelyn, please just play what's written. It will work exactly how he had imagined it if I just played what's written. And that's fair enough. You know, you completely respect that. So I think it depends on the situation. A lot of the recital pieces that I play and used to play, yes, I do take liberties. But always if a composer said, Evelyn, you know, kind of stick to the music here, that's absolutely fine. I think it's quite healthy to just sort of experiment. So, you know, one of the pieces that some maribas play that I wrote many, many years ago, A Little Prayer, you know, really simple piece of music. It really is. Now, if someone decided to kind of go off in a different direction with that piece, brilliant, you know, that would, for me, would be really interesting. Or to create a completely different kind of interpretation, whatever, that would be really interesting, or decided to reorchestrate it or something like that. Absolutely, you know, or decided to add or extend it or whatever. Absolutely fine, you know. So you have to trust on people's musical judgments and allow people to experiment with something. So I think I'm saying, yes, I would encourage it, you know, but do respect, if you have the chance to talk with the composers, you know, respect what they're actually saying, and see how you feel. So a lot of it is just this dialogue. I mean, I'll very quickly give you another example. The Christopher Rouse Percussion Concerto, Der gerettete Albrecht, which is all about being that character, Albrecht, you know, the cheeky little elf, you know, and no one knows what happened to him, you know, and he just sort of scuttled off, you know, at the end of the opera, and who knows where he is, you know. Well, he turns up in Christopher's Percussion Concerto, you know. So really, but he was the kind of composer who was extremely exact in how he notated everything. everything. And so there was no room to improvise in that situation. And that was made very clear by him as well. So there you have it, you know. So you just kind of use your musical judgment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, our next question is coming from the timpanist of the symphonic orchestra, straight from the rehearsal, Jacob Fullenwader.
Nice to meet you. So my question, sorry, I just ran from rehearsal. My question for you is, when you're commissioning a new work, how often are you in contact with the composer, and are you changing parts or adapting things to your own playing? Like, how much of it is a collaboration between you and the composer, and how much are you staying true to like the original rough draft?
Oh, well, first of all, every composer is different. So there isn't a set way. And as a player, it's really important, I feel anyway, to work with the composer. Ultimately, they're the ones who sit down and notate. You know, they're the ones who compose that piece of music. And I've just found almost every composer to be completely different. I really have. And that's what's so fascinating when you commission pieces of music. So, for example, working with Michael has been a real sort of hands-on experience with a lot of communication. And sometimes Michael has even bought some of the instruments. I know for UFO, you know, I think he acquired some bongos and things like that and various things so that he could get used to this. And it's very much a toing and froing. Now, bear in mind, a lot of the commissions happened before really the explosion of email, actually. So the tail end of fax machines, then the beginning of emails and things like that. So, you know, often the early commissions were even done through letter writing. And so you might have had a meeting or two, and then you wouldn't see anything until the finished result. But it is important to just sort of tap into how the composer functions. I quite like when there is a fair amount of communication. So one example, when I asked John Carigliano to write a percussion concerto, it took 10 years from the time of asking him to write, "Please, John, would you write a percussion concerto?" To the actual first performance, a long time. Now, his reaction was, "You've got to be kidding me. I'm not writing a percussion concerto. I don't like percussion, and I don't want to do it." So my job for the next few years was every now and again, "John, would you like to write a percussion concerto?" So bit by bit by bit. And, you know, what was fascinating in that situation was that John had experienced different percussion concertos up to that point. So the seed had been planted, and, you know, he was doing a little bit of research. And his issue, really, which is completely understandable, was that you couldn't always tell if it was a percussion concerto. So in a recording, there might have been percussion in the orchestra, percussion as a solo and so on, but it's not always clear as regards to what is solo, and that really bothered him. And so, you know, we kind of spoke about this dilemma, and he thought it was a dilemma. And a completely understandable one. And he felt that you could only determine it was a solo percussion concerto if you happened to be in a live situation in that concert, you know, and then you could see who was playing what. So anyway, he solved this situation in a really simple way. He created a piece in standard 3 movements. So first movement was wood, second movement metal, third movement skin. There's nothing unusual about that. That's been done by a lot of composers. However, he started each movement with a percussion cadenza. So when you think about that, he is giving the audience a chance to be in that world of percussion. So the whole first movement is just wood, and it starts with wood blocks, you know. Ba-bum, bum, bum. So it's giving a chance to sort of register the kind of rhythmic melodies that are going on there, the phrasing and that type of thing. So they're not experiencing something that they're already familiar with, such as the orchestra, the strings and the brass and the winds. It's this whole percussion orchestra. So he basically started each movement with the cadenza and worked through that. So that took a lot of toing and froing. Is this idea going to work, you know? And then I remember with John saying, please don't write for a lot of instruments. You know, A, I'm getting older, and B, you know, the economy was slightly changing within our industry, and orchestras were kind of, you know, we need to keep things to a minimum. So that was a conversation. And I think we don't yet know the professional lifespan of a solo percussionist yet, a multi-percussionist. And so we have to be sure that there's a body of repertoire for one or two instruments. I don't know when I get into my 70s or indeed 80s if I will be playing, you know, I'll probably maybe still be playing Dream Machine because there is time to get from one station to the other. But the Veni Venis and the Higdons and the Schwantners and those sort of things, you know, am I actually going to be able to get from there to there in a bar or 2 bars or whatever? So those sort of things we also have to think about. But, you know, every composer is different, and part of that writing process is to get to know the composer. You know, of course they will consider you as the musician, not the percussionist as the musician. You know, so you can line 10 people up to play a particular piece of music and you will get 10 different interpretations. All of them equally valid, equally interesting, but they'll be different, you know. But there might be something that the composer thinks, oh, you know, you might be more theatric, or, you know, you might be more, I don't know, something or another in your playing that is right for that situation, you know, but it may not be right for another situation. So in a way, we're sort of musical actors, you know, or actresses, whatever. So I don't know if that's answered your question.
Yes, totally.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Isaac, you ready? This is Isaac Morgan. He's a sophomore music education major.
Lovely. Hi, Isaac.
It's a great honor to have you here. Thank you.
Thanks, Isaac.
I was watching your Who's Listening series on YouTube, specifically episode 3 about the timpani, and I thought all the ways that you manipulated each different part of the timpani to achieve all those different sound effects was incredible. And you talk about the timpani in a very deconstructed way. You talked about how the head was amazing, and the bowl was amazing, and the pedal was fantastic. And I was wondering, how have you applied the same thinking to other instruments, and how has that influenced the way you create sound?
Yes, always, basically. I mean, it's just like a child with a toy. I think that's how we are naturally, you know. And I think we're in an unusual situation because there's always new developments to our instruments. You know, we don't yet have the Stradivarius marimba or the Steinway vibraphone. We're still, you know, I was in the practice room earlier, and this wonderful Bergerot vibraphone, you know, 4 octaves. Like, oh, wow, you know. It's interesting and it's fascinating. And so I think we're always pushing our boundaries as regards to what we do as individuals, but also what the instruments give to us. And then all the different spaces, we can manipulate those instruments, and then all the different tools that we have to use. So it's a never-ending journey. And, you know, the fascinating thing I find is that there are so many different avenues to music making. So here we are, you know, all together this week to perform pieces of music that people can follow and so on. But ultimately, you know, it's our individual sound that goes into that piece. But a lot of the exploration for me with the instruments is, A, you know, I just enjoy doing that. So it's out of my own curiosity too. But B, a lot of things, whether it's homemade items, whether it's found items, whether it's inexpensive items or very expensive items, they're all treated in the same way because there's a place for them all. You know, there really is. So I just have a whole box full of homemade shakers, for example. Or next month I'm due to play Tandon's paper percussion concerto. Well, I've just been spending the past week or two, you know, well, not this week, obviously, but making paper stuff, you know, whether it's relevant to the paper concerto or not, but just sort of ideas that it's brought to me. And it's great. And I think that the thing also with percussion is that, you know, it's accessible by all people of all ages, of all backgrounds, of all situations that we can share. So, but it's keeping this sense of discovery. Literally, you look at something, and of course we are taught how to play that instrument. But where's the end of that? You know what I mean? Where is the end? The end is just where you decide the end to be. So a head, and only the head, is interesting. You know, what can we do with that? I'll give you a little example. A few years ago, I was asked to write the music for a short film about Helen Keller. Now, Helen Keller, as I'm sure you know, was a deaf-blind lady. And so she used the language that is all happening in the hand, you know, which is extraordinary. And when you watch videos of her, you know, it's at such a speed. And so the actress who played Helen Keller had to learn how to do this, the basics albeit, and obviously she wasn't quite as fast as Helen, but nevertheless it was very effective. And so what we did was that we got a big drum head, basically, that was quite resonant. And so she did this language on the head. Now, that created such an interesting kind of rhythm, and it's something you couldn't notate, you know. And then we used another type of drum, because one of the things that Helen was determined to do was to use her voice. And in those days, this was very difficult to do. And deaf people were still classed as deaf and dumb. So she said, I want to use my voice. And so the first thing she said, once she was confident to use it, was, I am not dumb now. That's what she said. So we asked the actress to say those words, I am not dumb now, into a snare drum that was just, you know, no stand, but just sitting on the floor there. And so she got right down into the head of the drum and said, I am not dumb now, drum. And so it basically, you know, choked. It was a kind of choked feeling, and she felt the sound come back to her, and it didn't go anywhere. And so we then asked her to say the exact same words into this very large timpani, I am not dumb now. And so this was a means of communication. And she always said that everybody had a problem communicating with her, but she didn't have a problem communicating with anyone else. Do you see what I mean? So this was how musically we dealt with that situation. So it's just taking a normal snare drum, a timpani, and just using it in different ways. So again, it's what is the story? You know, what are you painting through sound? And with that, you just then fire off all sorts of situations and entry points as regards to the instruments and the tools that you use.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Evelyn, our last two questions, at least in our first of the 10 questions plus, comes from the players in the Wind Symphony as well. This first one is a DMA candidate, a doctorate candidate, Sophia Lowe.
I'll just speak through here. Okay.
Yeah. There we go. Do you want to face the audience?
Oh.
I'd like to see you.
It was really lovely to hear your episode on this Cultural Life podcast. You shared a lot of your stories, a lot of events that has happened. Specifically, I'm curious about the late James Blade.
James Blades, yes.
Has influenced you as a musician. What is he like as a teacher? Can you share some stories of how he has influenced you as a musician and any advice you have for musicians today?
So the late James Blades was like the grandfather of percussion, and still his history book on percussion instruments, for which there's a new edition now that includes solo percussion and also an updated orchestral percussion section, is available. Well, you know, the first time I met James Blades was around the age of 14, and he used to give many, many, many lecture demonstrations up and down the UK. And so I just happened to be bussed in, along with a busload of other kids, you know, to see this gentleman whom I'd never heard of before. And already James was in his 70s at that time. So I've always known him to be an older man, basically. So, and I was absolutely enthralled. Can you imagine? He was like a little garden gnome, you know, wearing a three-piece suit, white hair, and little beautiful sparkly blue eyes, just incredible. And he was very animated. And, you know, we all left that session feeling, wow, we're kind of changed people. You know, we're not quite the same as when we walked in to when we walked away from that event. Something had shifted, and I can't quite say what, you know, but something shifted that day. And then I met him when I went to the Royal Academy of Music, and he was a visiting professor. So he came to the academy, I think it was 2 days a term. And so he wasn't like the regular teacher there. And I was almost like a puppy waiting for their owner. I couldn't wait for him to come. And I think the reason for that, there are lots of reasons, but he was an incredible listener. So he believed that every person has a story to tell. Every single person is unique. That's that. So, and he really listened to that person. So the person came before the snare drum. The person came before the timpani. The person came before the xylophone. Do you know what I mean? Because he realized that in order to connect with that person, there had to be communication, you know, and that communication didn't have to start with, right, lesson number 1, right, what have you been doing this week kind of thing. It was literally getting to know that person. And that had a big influence on me because, of course, we're performing our music to people who don't necessarily know about paradiddles or flams or what kind of sticks we're using or anything like that. They couldn't care less. And we don't care about that either as regards to planting that in the audience, but they will care about feeling something. And feeling something doesn't always mean saying, oh, I really liked that. It's just feeling something, like I did when I was 14 years old. You know, I didn't understand everything he said, but there was just something that made me think, whoa, this, you know, there's something going on here that's really intriguing me. So I think he was just, well, I know he was just an incredible storyteller. He was as gracious with his words as he was with his music making. And he really treated his journey with unbelievable kind of respect and focus and importance. So, you know, he grew up as a circus drummer. So, and he became an academic. He worked with Benjamin Britten to create some of the iconic sounds that are in Benjamin Britten's operas. He worked with Stravinsky on The Soldier's Tale. You know what I mean? Things like that. And you think, wow, so everything was important to him. Everything had a place, and he was really willing to share that. So whether you were playing an exercise with someone picking the sticks up for the first time, or, you know, someone, a professional colleague or something, there would be the same focus there. I'll give you a little example. Just before Christmas, I received an email from a gentleman who happens to be a GP, a general practitioner, so a doctor. And he said, he has some instruments in his loft that he's had for years and years and years. He's now nearly 50 years old, this GP. And they belonged to James Blades. Now, he had percussion lessons from James Blades when he was a boy. James realized that this boy did not have any instruments at home and wasn't able to just buy these instruments. So James gave him some instruments that he had so that this boy could practice. Now, as the boy became a teenager, he said, you know what, I actually want to be a doctor. I want to go in for medicine rather than music. James still continued to give him all of that focus, the instruments, the lessons, all of that kind of thing in exactly the same way as if he was going in for music. So, you know, that's kind of interesting. Now, this GP who said he's still got these instruments in his loft wanted to donate them to the Evelyn Glennie collection. And it's fascinating because this GP was so influenced by James Blades and how he listened that he now uses a lot of those experiences by training future GPs. And he's actually written a book, a consultation book, about how he trains GPs, the relationship between patients, GPs, that sort of thing. I happened to buy the book over the Christmas period because you can read it in a day or so. And I was fascinated because although this is targeting GPs, it's targeting you and I. You know what I mean? So hopefully I won't have to go to the doctors very soon, but if I do, I will have a completely different perspective on, that kind of relationship between patient and doctor, and a much better understanding as regards to the landscape. But how much he talked about listening is a music lesson in itself. So again, another example, pick up a medical book, see whether it relates to you. So James really influenced a lot of people out with the music profession. What he did lasts, it really has lasted in a lot of us, and I think we can really be thankful for that. So he was incredibly influential. And in those days, his hands, he was suffering from arthritis and things like that. So he wasn't able to show you, things like that. That was irrelevant, because we're not all going to be able to, there'll come a point where everybody will say, oh, you know what, the body isn't quite functioning how it needs to function in order to play in the way that you might want to play. That day will come. That's just a fact. Ba-bum. But nevertheless, it doesn't stop you from being that communicator, and that's what he was, and that was a very powerful message.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. And we have another doctoral candidate, Nathan Siegel.
Good afternoon. It's good to see you again. So my question's a little more practical, a little less philosophical. You've enjoyed such a long career playing percussion across the world in a variety of contexts, and me, myself, as someone who plays keyboard with multiple grips, drum set, hand drums, frame drums, I'm wondering if you have a certain exercise regimen you do. Do you take vitamins, supplements? Do you follow a certain diet? Do you meditate in order to sort of keep up your hands with all the playing you're doing, and maybe like on the mental side as well? Do you have like a regimen you do?
No. Well, really interesting, because it is relevant to all of us, whether we're sitting at a computer or musicians, sports people, you name it, or people who are having to travel a lot and so on. I find, dare I say, for me, I feel it's all about listening. Listening to this machine, the human body, quite literally listening to it. So I take that really seriously. I don't want to be hostage to exercises, to routines, to things like that, because every single circumstance is different, and we're all different. So some people really, can handle that well and need that, and that's absolutely fine. So that's listening, in that respect. For me, I just need to simplify everything. I just want to simplify things. So, for example, if I, like the other day, flew from the UK to here. Now, there are several things I could have done. I could have just thought, oh my God, there's a big time difference here, and oh, now it's like 2 a.m. in the morning at home, and it's whatever it is here, and oh, crumbs, I'm going to be all funny in the morning, and whatever. So, no, it's 6 o'clock here, that's what the time is. Get going. You know what I mean? So just try and simplify things, or being picked up at 8 in the morning, whatever. Oh, don't think that that's now 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Oh, that's 2 o'clock or whatever it is in the afternoon. So, oh, I should be having lunch now, but oh, it's breakfast time. Too much, just simplify. Or if it comes to your own practice time, think, are you practicing? Are you rehearsing? What are you doing? What kind of headspace are you creating? So for me, I rehearse most of the time. And that means that even in the room, just down there, it was about imagining, in some situations, for part of that time, imagining an audience there, imagining being in a type of acoustic. So for example, with the paper concerto, where you obviously don't have the paper items to practice on, but you are imagining yourself, whooshing that great big sheet of paper, or imagining, picking that thing up and projecting that to the audience, etc., etc. And then part of the time would have been, right, this is just looking at the notes for the first time. So it's literally, looking, working out. So maybe 15, 20 minutes of that. I find in my situation that I usually play for maybe 20 minutes at a time, and then I'll just, just have a little break, so that could be, well, it depends where I am, it could just be sitting there, or it could be, I might just check my phone, or I might go out in the garden if I'm at home, or have a cup of tea, or, whatever, just something, just get yourself away and then come back again. For me, if I'm playing if I say to myself, right, you've got to practice for 2 hours, I don't think there'll be that much that's going to happen if I put that load on my shoulders. But if I say, okay, within those 2 hours, I'll just split that up into 20 minutes, I can handle that. But that's just me. Someone else might think completely different. So, yeah, I think, and a lot of that then relates to how you're listening to yourself. So if you are finding that something is going a bit squishy with your body, you might think, okay, why might that be the case? So just step away from the situation. And you might think to yourself, right, is it because I'm just playing too much? Is it because, well, actually I've gone from that instrument to that instrument, and so the muscle groups are completely different? So you then think, okay, how might I solve that situation and try different ways? Or it could be that, well, you're kind of distracted up here, and therefore there's things happening with your posture that isn't actually, you're not fully in that moment. All sorts of things. So listening involves a lot of things that isn't just about the playing. But when you are warming up, I find that, first of all, there aren't exercises I do. So today or this week, the focus is on Dream Machine. That's what I'm building the picture of,
That's the warm-up.
That is it. That's all I'm interested in. You know what I mean? Yes, I practice other repertoire, but that is my absolute kind of target, as it were, for this week. And so the warm-ups really, is relevant to that piece of music. So often when you're playing a concerto or something, you don't have the instruments in the dressing room. So sometimes you've got to wait. I think Dream Machine is last. So you've got to wait a long time before you get to the actual thing, and then you have to play really quietly when you come in. Well, but that is your warm-up. So, tomorrow, and just when I have the warm-up period before we all get together, it will literally be launching into that piece of music. Do you see? Yeah. So, because every situation is different, it really is. The time of day, the weather, the atmosphere, it could be cold out there, by the side of the stage, or in the dressing room. It could be really chilly, or it could be really hot, or it could be cold where you have to play, or there's always something, different circumstances. So I feel in my situation is simplifying, really simplifying. I don't know if that's helpful.
Yes, very much. And are you a fan of Glenn Gould, perchance?
Oh,
because
yes.
He does the same thing. He plays for a little bit, and he looks at his guard, comes back.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, crumbs. Yes. I mean, he was one of my biggest influences, and also Jacqueline Dupre, the British cellist. Mm-hmm. And, how can I express? I mean, I unfortunately never saw either of them live. They both passed away very young, really, 50-ish. And but again, when you experience them on the videos and things like that, it's this constant kind of giving, and when you look at Glenn Gould, and all of this sort of posture, you think, oh, heavens above, how on earth can you play like that, sitting on such a, with this sort of posture, but it worked for him, it really did. So again, that's all about listening, really, in these situations. But I think, just talking to different people, different instrumentalists, going to harp players, to singers, to brass players, seeing what sort of things they do in order to project their sound, that stamina, and stamina doesn't mean longevity, it's that quality, of sound. It's a stamina of focus. It's a stamina of, imagination. So it isn't always about a length of something. It's the weight, I suppose, a bit like dynamics. It's the weight of a dynamic. So dynamics can go this way and also that way. With percussion, we can see a dynamic much more easily, but actually a dynamic really can be like that. And that's what other players can give, because they're not, trombonist isn't going up and down like that when they get louder, but it just sort of expands like that. So I think we can learn a lot physically, mentally, idea-wise from all different disciplines.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have questions?
Awesome. So we're getting really close to the end of our set time with Evelyn, and we do want to have a little moment where we can ask questions from the audience, things that she might be able to address that she hasn't yet. But we have two more questions that are listed on the sheet. Asa's here? Yeah. So Asa Nero is here. He's a BA in music and a junior. And welcome, Asa.
This is good. Okay. Hi. I was wondering if you could talk about composing for Troilus and Cressida, and also your relationship to drama and works of poetry.
Yes, writing for Shakespeare's Troilus and Cressida. That was the first time I'd ever written for theatre, basically. And it was a completely new experience, working with a cast, with a director, that type of thing, which lasted a period of sort of 2-3 months. And so that in itself, was quite alien to me. And, but it was a fascinating experience, actually, and in many different ways, because obviously the director chose you as the composer for a particular reason. So in this case, it was because he wanted a really percussive score. And so yes, there was a lot of percussion. And, but also he was influenced by seeing a lot of the percussion instruments in the collection as regards to designing the set. So, for example, the Greeks lived in these great big shipping containers, and within the containers there were all these sort of things that you could strike, So the musicians came down from their, what we call the cheese pieces, which are little platforms, by the top of the stage, and they came down and went into these containers to play these sounds. And then we had sort of percussion things that were attached to the walls of the different parts of the stage, so that suddenly, the audience might have thought, well, that's just a design thing. And then somebody would go and whack it, and it would become a sound experience. So there's all of these different surprises. And then all of the clattery stuff that were hung from the ceiling, was fascinating. So every time there was a shift in the staging, the whole ceiling would clatter, 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 clatter like that. So, it was kind of interesting. But then it was a case of also getting to know the play. Now, Shakespeare at school, for me, just went shoof, right over my head, I have to say. I just didn't get it. I didn't enjoy it. And poof. And however, this opportunity, again, talking about, being outside of the box and feeling uncomfortable, that was definitely one of those occasions. But I went to all of the, the play reading, where they go through the play and all the actors are there and they go through line by line of this play. And so the director gets all the different people's interpretations of what they think that line might mean, or that phrase, as it were, might mean. So, some of the actors said, well, I haven't a clue, or, well, I think it means this. Another might have said, oh, I think it means that. I mean, imagine doing that with a music score. It'd be kind of interesting. Yeah. So, and that's what happened. So for me, as a kind of, fly on the wall and observing all of this, was a huge learning curve and really helpful, I have to say. So it just kind of put things in plain English for myself. And then, I was there during all of the rehearsals, and which gave me ideas as to the types of instruments to use based on the actors and how they interpreted, their lines and so on. And then also getting to know them, with the theatre, really. And so, some of them you know, like this, or cups of tea, or kind of quite frenetic, or some are quite laid back, or whatever. So that was all sort of, you know, just gave you little ideas. And so, yeah, I think it was just this experience of absolutely, again, working as a team. So there's no way that you could have written that score and not have met the actors and actresses. There's no way that you could have just written that score by reading the play yourself and thinking, well, I think this is what it means. Right. Totally an integrated experience. So that was that. And it was always kind of tweaked, you know, during all of the rehearsals, even after the first performance. We would all go on stage at the end, and there would be an analysis of what went on, what worked, what didn't work, what can be changed, and that also applied to the music as well. So it was interesting, you know. I mean, imagine us giving a concert tomorrow night, and then we all get on stage afterwards and said, right, how was all of that? What should we change? You know, as a collective, right. be interesting. Yeah. So whether I do it again, I think I'd like the opportunity to do it again. I really would. It is a different kind of schedule to what I'm used to. And you just have to be prepared to devote that time. So all concerts took a back seat. It was literally, that is the time to concentrate on that project.
Wow. Gotcha.
There we go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow. Well, these are great questions, yeah? I mean, really, I think we all have a lot to take away from this session. And I think that Evelyn has spoken to a lot of things that we've talked about a lot in past semesters and in our daily lives here as we make music. And those are to rise up, to be positive, to look for solutions, not problems, to be able to be open to new ideas and not to be closed off to any type of preconceived notions. And so thank you so much. That's so awesome. Why don't we take a few moments right now to, if there's questions in the audience, and then we can finish it up with one final question for you, okay? So is there anyone here that would like to ask Evelyn something? Usually they're not this quiet. That's right.
No problem.
Okay, this is J.T. Baker.
Hi. A lot of people that are deaf or hard of hearing, they see that part of their life as a big, it's like an aspect of like their culture. A lot of time, because people that are hard of hearing or deaf, because they use sign language, it controls who they speak to, and because of that, there's a culture that develops within them. And someone's culture personally, I think, would have a big effect on their music. Like someone like Bartok, his study of folk songs, everything had a huge influence on what he played and what he wrote. So do you think that you have a connection to like the deaf community, and how do you think that influences your music creation?
That's a really interesting question. Thank you very much. Yes, it's fascinating, the history of deafness, actually. And when you delve into that, you see, I mean, if we think of Beethoven in his day, where there were no hearing aids or cochlear implants or anything like that for him to use. And it's fascinating how he began to use his body and literally have his body linked to the piano that he was playing. And that was really, I think, a fascinating observation for him to be aware that there was, you know, something in vibration, in reverberance, and how that could influence his enjoyment and continuity of composing and playing music. And then, of course, you know, hearing aids were quite primitive for a long time. When I was at school, I wore hearing aids, and then I wore a thing called a phonic ear, so that the teacher could walk around the classroom and didn't always have to be at the front, so I could pick up what the teacher was saying, and without disturbing any other people. Now, that is really old technology now. And then the explosion of cochlear implants, and the discovery of whether a baby has a hearing impairment whilst they're still in the mother's womb. Now, normally that was detected when perhaps the infant was 2-3 years old, by which time speech had kind of gone. And so it's quite interesting. However, you know, this whole conversation about sign language and about deaf people who use their voice. So for me, I wasn't born deaf. I began losing my hearing from the age of 8 onwards. So I regard myself as a deafened person as opposed to someone who was born deaf. So for me, sign language is a language. It's a language like German, like French, like English, like Spanish, you know, it is a language. So, and I think that it's great if we can encourage sign language in our schools, so then, because it isn't only deaf people that need sign language, you know, it can be people with other different types of challenges. And I think there's a realization that that is the case. There's also a lot of people who, as I say, long ago would have been without language, but because of cochlear implants have allowed them to be in much more in the oral world. So they can go to mainstream schools, they can go to universities and so on and so forth, and have a huge kind of broader option as regards to what they do. And I think for me also, what we've realized is that, and you know, it's only when we think about Beethoven, you know, when I was growing up, the schools just could not link music and deafness. You know, they were just poles apart. So a lot of the schools for the deaf just simply did not have music because they believed that, well, if you can't hear, there's no way you can engage with music. But yet we've had this extraordinary man, you know, who introduced us to vibration, i.e. Beethoven, you know. So, and I think bit by bit that as, there was one man in particular, his name was Danish, and he is still alive. His name is Klaus Bang, and he's Danish. And he used a lot of the off percussion instruments. And he worked a lot with deaf children, but deaf children who could not use their voice. So he would place the big, you know, individual marimba bars on these very large resonating boxes against the child's tummy and chest and throat. And he would strike these bars. And so, you know, the child would feel the vibration of these bars. And then we'd bring another bar in. And it might have just been maybe, I don't know, a third apart, a minor third, whatever it might have been. And so the child would know there was a difference there in the vibration. But he would then begin to strike the bars. Bum, 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 bum. Hello, how are you? I'm very well, because things like inflection and placement of sound, dynamics, accents, like that type of thing, you know, they don't mean anything to a deaf person if they've been born deaf and have had no means of technology to help. So this was really important to bring sound to a deaf person, and it was done through a musical situation. And so bit by bit by bit, and then as technology began to improve, this really, they realized that actually deaf people could dance. You know, you can't just plonk all deaf people together and say that's what they experience, because deafness is so complicated. So for me, I can get the impact of a sound, but what I miss is the pitch. So when I play the marimba, it's lots and lots of different impacts. So I can tell it's in the low register. I can tell it's in the high register, but I couldn't tell if that's a C, a B flat, a D, or anything like that. But the impact I get. But when I open my body up to the resonance of the sound, then I hear that. You know what I mean? So that was really the kind of, that's an important part for all hearing impaired people, is finding out what is that resonance after the impact. So a lot of people will get that impact, but it's how do they relate the resonance and what is the emotional impact of that resonance. So that, you know, with improvisation and things like that, you know, and soundscapes, it's the resonance that I really get attracted to, and why probably I don't speak so much about technique and things like that, because it's that sense of touch and getting that resonance that's the difference for me. And I get that emotional appeal when I do it myself, you know, and that isn't a kind of ego thing. That is just simply because you're right there with the instrument. You know, you have a different kind of relationship with it. So to get that when you're sitting in an audience is not so easy, you know, or getting it from a recording is almost now impossible because you don't have anything to look at. So really it's tuning into that yourself as a player is really important. So it's an interesting question. So I think it's definitely played a part in my journey as a musician. Thank you. Really interesting.
Is there another one from the audience right now? Okay, Alex.
Performance anxiety and how I deal with that. Yes, I get nervous, you know, I do get nervous and always have done for as long as I remember, you know, when I've been performing. You know, there's that line where I hate to kind of saying you deal with anxiety. I don't know if you deal with it in any kind of particular way. It's just knowing what that threshold is between recognizing that it's there, and if you can cope with that, if you're willing to talk to that anxiety, as it were, you know, just sort of saying, right, okay, I feel you, you know, I feel that anxiety, or to the point of thinking, you know what, it's making me not enjoy this experience, or it's making me feel a bit nauseous, or, you know, where I don't actually want to be here. It's just finding that fine line. And it's thinking to yourself, is this normal anxiety? You know, is this healthy anxiety? Is it perfectly normal? Where, okay, you might have to go to the loo more than normal, or you might, you know, just sort of be standing up and you know, and sitting down and, you know, crossing your legs and whatever. That's fine. That's perfectly okay. And if it is a case where it's absolutely affecting what you're doing on the stage, then I think it's worth just talking to lots of different people about what they do. But ultimately, you know, the kind of oxygen that we all need is how we breathe, you know, quite literally how we breathe. And if that can play a part in you know, dealing with the various emotional roller coasters that happens. And that also applies after a performance as well, you know, because it's very easy to get tied into or sucked into the, well, that was really lovely and that was wonderful and that was real. But ultimately, you know yourself, you know, what the situation was. And you just need a moment to kind of be with that feeling, really. And it just kind of keeps you on the sort of straight and narrow, you know, and then you know what needs attending to the next day. So yes, it's just having that conversation with yourself, you know, and if you feel you do need to sort of talk to people about it, by all means do that. You know, there has to be a platform for that to happen, because it can be absolutely devastating for a lot of people, and we can be losing on incredible creative things and performances because of that, you know, because it can just be so debilitating, really. So yes, it's interesting, but it is a form of listening, really. But exploring that you know, almost the ancient style of breathing. I'm not into yoga or anything like that, you know, or Zen-like things, but I do know that just tapping into the kind of the history and the medical side of breathing might just, you know, just maybe create a little shift in how you function, and see what happens. But there we go. Thank you.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think owning that feeling is important. And I don't know, but for me, but sometimes if I'll just actually say it out loud to somebody, wow, I'm nervous today, you know, and it kind of just feels a nice wash away. So being prepared and owning it.
It is, and you know, it's one of those things also that sometimes gets worse, as it were, you know, as the years goes on, and sometimes it for some people it gets better. Sometimes they don't really see any change and things like that. So again, and it might be, for example, if I'm giving completely improvised concerts, I don't feel any nerves whatsoever, and that's a really strange thing. Tomorrow I'll probably feel nervous, you know, because there is that responsibility towards obviously yourself, and there's a responsibility of the composer, of all of your fellow colleagues, and most of all the audience, because, you know, they've decided to be there. So there's a lot of things going on there. And then I feel sort of slightly less nervous if I'm performing, strangely, with the jazz trio. And I don't know why that is. So I've got absolutely no idea, but that is just how it is. And, but it's recognizing that. But it's also, I think, really important to just, if you can, control what feels right for you before performances, on a performance day, that type of thing. So, you know, I find that I don't really like to be kind of doing that much before a performance. So, you know, I don't want people coming into my dressing room, you know, can I have a picture? Can you do this? Can you do that? I don't really want that, you know, and I would feel perfectly okay to say, you know what, not now, thank you. And so it's kind of just knowing what is right for you and being absolutely comfortable saying, this is what I really need right now to perform, because your focus is ultimately on that performance. And people, I think, will absolutely understand that. So there's a time and a place for everything. So just recognize what's good for you.
Beautiful. Wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, we'll just do this last one. Okay, we have one more question that Denton Sutherland's going to ask. And, but as he's coming up, I just want to take a moment to say thank you for your inspiration, your music, your motivation for us today. And we're so excited about your performance tomorrow and Thursday. So if we could give Evelyn Glennie one more big round here. I'd like to ask all of you to come up on stage after this last question, and we can get a picture with everybody, with Evelyn. That would be wonderful. And then come to the concert tomorrow night, 7:30. This is Denton Sutherland.
Thank you. It seems like you've had so many amazing performance experiences and opportunities, like playing on Sesame Street or at the Olympics. I'm curious, like, what your most fond memories are and how they've impacted your life and to this moment.
Oh, it's a great question, that, because often I am asked, you know, well, what has been the highlight, you know, of your journey so far? And it, you know, it goes back to really, you know, some of the early questions where every single opportunity moment is the highlight in a way. It's almost like, what's your favorite instrument? Well, if you say, right, Evelyn, you have to play that stage, that's going to be my favorite instrument. You know, if it's a snare drum in front of you, that's your favorite instrument. If it's a wood block in front of you, that's your favorite instrument. If Dream Machine is in front of you, that's my favorite piece. If it's the Schwantner, that's my favorite piece. If it's a piece by Mark, that's my favorite piece. So again, it simplifies things, and it just helps you psychologically to hone in on what is important at that point in time. And so thinking, well, who might be in the audience if it's in a teeny little venue in the middle of nowhere on an island in Scotland or something, it's an opportunity. So that's how I sort of build my kind of journey in a way. So you take each situation as that building block, and you know, and I think the foundation of what you do, and developing the art of opportunities and of receiving opportunities, and then what you do with those opportunities, how you deal with them afterwards, so the reverberation of that opportunity, etc., is so important. And again, that was something that James Blades, I found in him. He found an opportunity in everybody, actually. He would make his next door neighbor completely fascinating, and you ended up saying, I really want to meet your neighbor, that sort of thing. So yes, the variety, I think, has been interesting, as you mentioned, the Olympics and Sesame Street. And again, walking into the whole Sesame Street world, it was just so welcoming. Everything was, you're just suddenly in this, well, literally Sesame Street world. Your dressing room, had all Sesame Street stuff in it, and the talent of people, and again, the teamwork was extraordinary, and just, it's just bringing people in and making them part of what their aim is, I think is so extraordinary. And that's definitely what I remember from that experience.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark, very much indeed. Thank you, everybody.